Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. I expect that we'll have a couple of people kind of straggling in as we go along, but I want to respect everyone's time, and so we'll get started on this. This is our third neighborhood meeting about redesigning the city's leaf collection program. If you haven't met me yet, my name's Dave DeKid. I'm the Director of Innovation for the City of Bloomington. I'm also the facilitator and project manager for this project for the city's innovation team that's working on this project. Tonight, we're going to go back to the beginning. We're going to revisit the reason that we wanted to re-examine the leaf collection service in the first place. We'll talk a little bit about the problems that we hoped to solve, what we tried, and how it all worked out. Along the way, we're going to hear directly from some of the residents who participated in testing some of the prototypes and others who participated in the pilot. Toward the end of the meeting, we'll outline the innovation team's recommendation for public works. And then we're going to want to hear from you. We want to break into small groups and get a little bit more information of if this is our way going forward, what are the barriers that you see, and help us understand what are some of the options for overcoming some of those barriers. Tonight's meeting, we're going to give you a lot of information in the first 50 or so minutes. We are recording the meeting, and a recording will be linked from the project page afterwards. And many of you have heard me say this URL a lot, and it's located at the bottom of this slide, but bloomington.in.gov/innovate/2020-leaves. That's the project page where you can find much more detail about the background for this project, the recording for the first meeting, some of the information that we gathered along the way. And then after tonight, you'll also see this presentation as well as the final recommendation that we put forth. I mentioned that in the second part of the meeting, we'll actively collect your input. That part will not be recorded. So if you have questions as we go along, please post them to the chat. Before getting into the presentation, I want to thank our woman behind the scenes, Holly McLaughlin. She's the public affairs specialist for the City of Bloomington Utilities, and Holly is managing our Zoom for us tonight. Hey, Holly.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming.
A couple of housekeeping items. If you've been participating in any Zoom meetings in the pandemic, these are going to sound really familiar, but when you arrive tonight, both your audio and video were turned off. Go ahead and keep them off until we gather in the small groups in the second part of the meeting. Then we'll have the opportunity to get a little bit more intimate and get to know one another, and you can turn on your video and your microphone. You'll see that the video is enabled for the city employee speakers while they're speaking, just like you can see me now. And so you'll see some of the video turn off and on so that we can keep things focused on the presentation. So now I'm going to turn it over to Michael, who's going to talk about our current leaf management service. Next slide.
While she's changing, I'll just say good evening to everyone. Thank you for taking the time to be with us this evening to discuss this leaf management system a little bit deeper. My name is Michael Large. I'm the operations manager for the City of Bloomington's Department of Public Works. I'm here tonight to talk about our current leaf management system, which we have in place. It's focused on two different methods and aspects. One is the vacuum leafing, which you're all familiar with. It takes place from November to December each year. That is performed by our street division of Public Works. And there is also the yard waste collection, which takes place between April and December every year, which is performed weekly by our sanitation division of Public Works. There is no leaf collection in January through March because of the snow control that takes place. But just to be clear, all the leaves that we do collect are composted or donated to be composted at local nonprofits, churches, such. Total operating costs for 2019 for both these operations was approximately $709,000, or about $46 per household. Just give you a reference on what it costs to perform these each year. Please slide. So in 2020, we took some information that we got from you, the general public, and some of our first public meetings that we have. We learned that the schedule doesn't always align with everyone's plans, nor does the leaves falling align with our schedule. So without being able to control Mother Nature, what we did this year was we started a week later. With that, we also found from our street department crews that raking of the tree plots was a very laborious part of this process. So working with some nonprofit groups this year, we were able to bring them on board and contract with them to work ahead of our leafing crews. This allowed the vehicles that you can see in the photograph here on the slide to consistently work forward and not have to stop to rake out between curbs and cars and other obstructions that would come up along the routes as they were going. In addition, working with our GIS team here at the city's ITS department, we were able to update the interactive leaf map, which I know that some of you have visited. It was able to give a day by day, neighborhood by neighborhood, down to the very street on which the leaves are being collected, and give you a more up-to-date timeline on when that was going to be coming to your area. In addition to that, we worked with the ITS department to create these great graphic signs that I myself went through on the neighborhoods and placed, anywhere from a day to 4 days ahead of when the leafing crews were going to be in your neighborhood. It allowed you the opportunity to, once again, scan the QR code and get to the interactive map so that the timeline on your leaf collection to the curb line was a little more streamlined this year. If you could, the next slide, please, Holly. So these few changes were very productive, and while it did save us a week on the front end and a week on the back end, that is labor costs that we were able to save. It also decreased the amount of U-reports that we received. U-reports are a way for the citizens of the city of Bloomington to report any and all things that they see wrong or that can change as they go through the day-to-day operations. More importantly, our leaf crews were more satisfied, not just from a labor standpoint, but also from a risk of injury standpoint. And with that being said, the same amount of leaves were collected this year with these changes that were collected in previous years. This year, we collected and disposed of approximately 329 loads of leaves, which, just to give it a number, is about 4.5 million pounds of leaves. I know that's a hard thing to picture. The best way that I can describe it is nine full-size locomotives. That's about 4.5 million pounds. With that and all these other changes, though, we were able to save an estimated of approximately $90,000. Some cons are it creates a shorter season to collect the leaves. So while we did collect approximately the same amount of leaves, there's still some on the ground even today, I'm sure, that we need collecting. And I'm sure that phone calls come here and there, and the street department can speak more to that. While these changes do not fully address all of the financial, environmental, and service delivery goals of the city, that is part of the reason why we're here tonight, to dive a little bit deeper and get some more out of this entire process and what it does. And to that point, Lauren Travis is here to dive a little bit deeper into the economics of the situation.
Thank you, Michael. Hi, my name is Lauren Travis, and I serve as the Assistant Director of Sustainability and also a member of this innovation team. In our first meeting for this project, we dove into the details. If you're interested in finding a recording of that meeting, the webpage for our project is bloomington.in.gov/innovate. Sorry about that. Innovate 2020 leaves. Tonight we're going to hit the highlights. The original motivation for rethinking our leaf collection service came from our city council. During a 2018 budget hearing, council inquired about the cost of leaf collection, which turns out to be close to $709,000 per year when you count all of the resources of our street division, who operate the vacuum trucks, our sanitation division, who operates the yard waste service, and the city of Bloomington utilities, who clean out the storm drains. Another issue that we were encountering prior to this pilot was that the vacuum leaf collection is hard to staff, has a small time frame, which Michael mentioned, that doesn't necessarily coordinate with the schedule, and the current service wasn't meeting our broader goals. And another reason that we embarked on this is resident satisfaction. We know that historically, reports, emails, calls to public works increased noticeably in October, November, and December. Residents report about leaves ready for pickup, ask when the vacuum service will be on their street, and have some issues from uncollected leaves blowing around, and also experience flooding from storm sewers clogged with leaves and other debris. Next slide, please. While all of this has been true for a while, this last year made trends more urgent, and as well as our commitment to climate action and reducing the cost of services. The vacuum leaf service is actually funded primarily through the motor vehicle and highway tax, and revenue from this tax fluctuates according to cost of fuel and how much people use. Those both decreased last year and will continue to decrease as we're continuing to try to meet our goals. And with that, I would like to hand it to Kevin to talk more about the process for finding solutions financially. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Lauren. So basically, the first question is, what do we do next? And I think the main thing that we have done to try to address this problem is talk to you as residents. And I apologize. I'm Kevin Curran. I'm the Director of Audit and Finance Systems, and also a member of this innovation team. But again, we wanted to get residents involved. That was part of the key of working on a solution, and also work with the leaf collection crew and get their input as well. And I think both Lauren and Michael addressed that to a certain degree. We collected ideas from you guys through a community-wide survey. We had in-person interviews where it was possible, and we had the initial community engagement meeting that was very similar to this one, where we got some feedback from you as residents. We also interviewed the leaf collection crews and wanted to get an understanding of their planning and operations, and also went out to observe the vacuum and yard waste collection services in action. Next slide, please. Another thing we did, we didn't want to completely recreate the wheel, so we researched what other cities are doing, what works, what maybe they've tried and doesn't work, and we generated some new solutions within the team. And then we had a second community meeting with you as the public, and got some additional ideas, a lot of which really provided food for thought as we move forward. Now, if you're interested, I think there is our slide or our website that has all of the ideas that were generated. So you can feel free to look at that and give your input in terms of what maybe we haven't considered that we should consider differently. But if we go to the next slide, what we ended up doing as a team then is we took all of the input from you as the community and folks that are involved in the leafing process, and we refined the ideas and ranked them according to whether they would meet the core goals of the project, which are listed on the slide. We ranked all of the ideas and produced 4 ideas that we thought were promising enough to test in the real world. And now I'll hand it over to Corey, who will tell you more about the prototyping of those 4 ideas.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. I'm Corey Hawkins. I'm the program specialist at the Banneker Community Center and a member of this incredible innovation team. So the 4 prototype options that rank the highest according to the project criteria are listed here. I'm going to walk you through what each one entailed, the pros, the cons, and then the decisions about each one. We'll also hear from some folks involved in the prototypes about their personal experience with the kind of what they thought coming into the prototypes, what was tested, and then what their overall conclusions were. So let's get into it. Let's go to the next slide and we'll talk about option 1. Awesome, yard waste bins. We gave each household a 64-gallon yard waste bin and asked them to store all of their leaves in 1 or more bins. Full bins would be set out to the curb for collection by the city on a bi-weekly basis. Collection would be completed by a combination of vacuum and yard waste crews. In theory, this option was really popular because of the control it gave the residents. As soon as the leaf starts to fall, you can put them in a bin, they get picked up. If you have a few different kinds of leaves that shed at different times, no problem. You can fill your bin, set it to the curb. But in practice, even though they were the 64-gallon bins, the largest currently offered by sanitation, they don't actually hold a lot of leaves unless you shred them, which literally means putting a leaf blower, a weed eater inside of the bin and shredding them up. But then the bin gets really heavy, really hard to move to the curb, really hard for the crews to use it. So you could use 3, 4, 5, or 6 bins, but then where do you put them? As you can see, option 1 definitely had its hurdles. So now we want to go ahead, we can move to the next slide, and I want to ask John Kennedy, a participant in this prototype, to just talk a little bit about his experience. John, if you want to take it away.
Okay, thanks. I'm glad to be part of this prototyping project. As you can see the picture there, you can see me that I was raking some leaves together to test out the bin when Corey and Dave came by to talk to me about it. I found that it wasn't that hard, and actually it was relatively easy to put the leaves into the bin and store them. But I didn't think it was actually for me. It wasn't the best idea. I have a front yard that doesn't have many trees except the street trees, and between my trees, some shrubs, and my neighbor's leaves, I'm able to keep the front yard fairly clean just by running over 2 or 3 times in the fall with the mower and mulching them into the grass. My side yard here and another side yard both collect a lot of leaves from the backyard and from the neighbor's leaves, and they're a little bit difficult to manage because I have to pull all the leaves into a tarp and carry them up into the backyard. But in the backyard, I have a fenced-off area that's probably has about 12 feet by 12 feet for leaf pile, and I generally pull these things into a tarp and throw them up into the leaf pile. And by the end of the fall, the leaf pile is probably about 3 feet deep, maybe 4 feet deep in there because the backyard has a lot of leaves. And between blowing and raking and putting them in a tarp, I get most of them in there. So I think that this is the bin is a good idea. I actually thought while I thought I got more in there than I ever expected I would get into a 64 gallon bin. But for example, you could see my side yard there. If I had filled it up in the backyard, I have no smooth surface to roll the bin out to the street until it gets to the driveway. And that I think would be a problem. And also, as I said, I usually do leafing, except for mowing in the front yard. I do the rest of it really once during the year. So that I would probably say, give me 5 bins or 10 bins, I don't know, and I'd be glad to fill them up then if I use that process. But 1 bin at a time would just make it. I just don't know how I manage it. So while I say I thought it was easy to do, it's not one that I would recommend.
Thanks so much, John. As John mentioned, there are good parts of this idea and there are not good parts of this idea. And even in this one particular property, John manages, his leaves in the back and in the side and in the front in different ways. And so it really sort of gave us some insight into how to manage leaves in different ways, but also the idea that leaf management shouldn't be every single weekend from fall to winter. Maybe you want to bust it out in one weekend. So I really appreciate you commenting, John. We're going to go on to option number 2. So our second option explored the idea of having neighborhood-based locations where leaves could be dropped off. This option had some of the same positives as the yard waste bins, in that the leaves are contained, the residents have control over when the leaves are off their property, but the barrier of getting leaves to the drop-off point was too high for residents. I personally would not want to put leaves in my vehicle and drive them 5, 10, 15, 20 blocks away. And the barrier for locating these drop-off points, finding those central locations that were city property, public property that could be utilized was also a big barrier. So we didn't take this idea any further. So we're going to go ahead and move on to option 3. Awesome. Option 3 explored using the Monroe County alert system, which already exists, to notify residents when the vacuum truck would be in their neighborhood within about a week. Those who tried this option said that if they got a text or email or phone call, they could choose, it would likely motivate them to take action, but signing up for the service was kind of clunky and would require a lot of promotion for people to sign up. It's not automatic. And it's not a super thrilling thing to spend your time doing, signing up for an automated service. So by itself, this option wasn't a winner. It wouldn't reduce the cost of leaf collection or environmental impact, while it would give people more accurate notification of when the vacuum truck would be in their neighborhood. The residents still had to rely on the schedule of the city, as opposed to collecting leaves when they were actually falling on their property. So like option 2, option 3 really didn't go anywhere, but wait till you hear about option number 4. Let's go ahead to the next slide. So option number 4, we saved the best for last. We tested asking residents to mulch and compost all of their leaves and not put any leaves to the curb. By sheer coincidence, many of the folks in the group already mulch and composted, so this option wasn't that much of a stretch for them. For the folks new to the methods, they were surprised at how easy mulching using a standard lawnmower was. Literally just mow over your leaves, and you're done. Gardeners in this group pointed out that not all leaves do well in backyard compost. Oak, eucalyptus, gum tree leaves, and seeds all break down really slowly and can sometimes be harmful to your garden. But we're going to go ahead and hear from a couple of residents. We can go on to the next page. And I think I saw Jane come on in. Jane, if you want to go ahead and talk to us a little bit about your experience with mulching and composting.
Hi, I'm Greg. I'm Jane's husband.
Yeah, go for it, Greg. Sorry.
Okay, no, it's okay. I'm sitting in.
Picture for you.
That's all right. Yes. So our yard is, we have a front yard and a backyard, and our backyard is fenced in. We tried this, we had the crew come over, and we took a tour of the yard and everything. We tried mulching with the lawnmower. We just had a standard mulching mower. We didn't have a bag or anything like that. But with our backyard, we have 3 fully mature trees, 1 oak tree and 2 maple trees. And the leaf, I mean, they just cover the backyard. There's so many leaves in our backyard when we get going. So we ended up trying the mulching method in with the weed eater, with the weed whacker in a bin, because we already had a yard waste bin.
Yeah.
And it works very well, but it's a lot. For me, it seemed like a lot of extra work. But it did, if you did it right, you could get the leaves crunched down to a very good compostable pile. We were able to do our entire front yard because it doesn't have a lot of leaves. We were able to contain all of our front yard and break it down and spread it around underneath bushes and other stuff like that. And we were able to take care of that, but our backyard was just too many leaves. We just couldn't do it.
Yeah.
It was too much extra work to do. So I ended up just raking everything into the bin, and we have a side part of our yard that's about 10 by 15 to 20, and we have no like foot traffic or anything over there. So I ended up piling all the leaves, taking the bins, filling them up, putting them over there, and they're currently sitting there. So we've self-contained all of our leaves for the year, but we just have a big pile of leaves on the side of the house for right now.
Okay, so you made a compost bin without walls.
Right. We don't really want to keep it there though, because we do have compost bins in the back, but they're not big enough to hold all the leaves that we have.
Right. So volume is definitely something to consider, that maybe a hybrid model of, you could do your front yard, but you'd need a little bit of pickup for the backyard.
Right. But we could possibly get it done with a better mulching mower. Bagging mulching mower would be better if we had a bag attachment to it.
Yeah.
That would make it a lot easier to go through and do, but I'm not sure that we can keep all of the leaves on our property just because of how many there are. Because not only do we have the 3, but all of our neighbors have trees, and since it's a fenced in backyard, we get a bunch of extra leaves from them too. So
yeah, certainly it's all about what your neighbors are putting on your yard.
Right.
Well, thank you so much for your insights, Greg. Thank you for participating, as well as sort of lending some of your thoughts. We also had a resident. Yeah. We also had a resident, Corey, in the Blue Ridge neighborhood that unfortunately couldn't join us today, but he did send some comments along. He said that the mulch compost prototype really made him intentionally think about this as a more sustainable replacement for leaf pickup. And that he learned, most importantly, that mulching in place is beneficial for your lawn. He previously had thought, oh, it's going to kill everything. But it actually can be good for the plants, flowers, flower beds, like Greg mentioned. And it became clear to some of his neighbors very quickly that, oh, there is another way to do it. So it sounded like some of his neighbors were already curious about mulching and composting their leaves as well. So we were so excited to hear from some of these residents, and we'll get a chance to talk more as we go to the small groups. But we can go ahead and move on to the next slide. So ultimately, this option had the highest potential for meeting all the project goals and had the lowest barriers. But as we've heard from some of our residents, it was not perfect. Some people couldn't process 100% of their leaves. Sometimes, the yard was small, the side yards were small and hard to get the barrel through or move piles through. And some folks were unfamiliar with mulching and composting and just needed some more education and support. So now I will turn it over to another innovation team member, Beth, to talk about what was implemented ultimately in the pilot. Take it away, Beth.
Thanks, Corey. Hi, everyone. I'm Beth Rosenbarger, I am the Planning Services Manager with the Planning and Transportation Department. And obviously, I'm a member of the Innovation team. So as we move from the prototype to the pilot, for the pilot, we combined option number 4, which focused on mulching and composting all leaves on site, with option 1, which used yard waste bins to collect all the leaves. For both of the options on their own, we had some concerns. So for option number 4, we were a bit worried about the ability of residents to mulch and compost 100% of their leaves. Some questions we asked ourselves were, what if their yard is very leafy? What about species of trees whose leaves don't mulch or compost well? What about people with little to no space in their yard? Or what about people who are new to composting and mulching? And similarly, for option 1, we had some questions such as, how many leaves can a yard waste bin even hold? Can a yard waste bin work for someone with a leafy yard? Can we expect someone to put all of their leaves into bins or bags? And will that be more work for people spread out over several weekends instead of knocking out yard work in one weekend? So with these questions in mind, we hoped that combining the options would decrease the challenge for residents and increase how well it worked, of trying to manage 100% of their leaves on their own property. Next slide, please. So the challenge to the pilot participants was to mulch and compost as many of their leaves as possible on site and only put excess leaves out to be collected by the yard waste service. And pilot households could not use the vacuum truck at all. So they participated this last season, and those were the options. The pilot households were supplied with a brochure and a short video about mulching and composting in order to help those who hadn't tried those methods before. Next slide, please. In our observations before the pilot, we had noticed that once leaves were raked to the curb, awaiting their vacuum pickup, cars, buses, rain, wind, and more easily scattered the leaves into streets, sidewalks, and storm drains. So we saw potential benefits to the option we were piloting. And some of those benefits were, most people already mow their lawns, so they likely have the skills and necessary equipment to mulch in place. Mulching and composting instead of raking to the curb prevents the leaves from littering the streets and sidewalks and from clogging the storm drains. The pilot options can be done at any time, whether the leaves just begin to fall or whether a yard is thick with leaves. The resident gets to decide on their own schedule, but that schedule is based on your tree's schedule, of course. Mulch and compost can act as fertilizer to feed lawns and to decrease the volume of leaves needed to be collected. And finally, putting excess leaves in bins or bags serves to contain the leaves and keeps them out of streets, sidewalks, and drains. So while they're waiting to be collected, they're contained in a vessel. Next slide, please. And now we're going to hear from one of our pilot participants, John from Park Ridge East. Let me see. John, are you on the call?
Yes.
All right. John, can you start by describing your yard to us? And on a scale of 1 to 10, how leafy would you describe your yard?
Sure. Our yard is maybe 2/3 of an acre. It's not very big. And it is mostly gently sloped, and there's a lot of grass and a lot of mature trees around us. So we have a lot of leaves, 8, 9, 10, something like that, a lot.
On the 1 to 10 scale. Sure.
Yeah.
And what had you done in the past before the pilot year to take care of your leaves?
Sure. In the past, we've worked with the lawn service, the people that mow our lawn throughout the growing season. We also paid them to dispose of the leaves. So they collect it in tarps. And this is what I did in the past before we did this, collect it in tarps, take it down to the curb, and then the city hauls it away. That maybe, you know, there might be some odds and ends that end up getting bagged too, but it would be like one or maybe two, even easily two even big hauls down there.
Gotcha. So you would rake onto tarps, haul the tarps down to the curb, and wait on the vacuum collection.
Yep.
In the past.
Yep.
And when you heard about the pilot proposing mulching and composting as much as possible, and then using the yard waste bins for the excess, what did you think about it before?
I thought that it was crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that it was crazy because in the past, my experience with mulching our leaves, which are oak leaves primarily, there's a tulip tree and then other smaller trees, but primarily a tulip tree and then multiple oak trees. The oak leaves are just really, really difficult to mulch. They're very tough. They don't fall all at once at all. But somehow seemingly they do, you know, and then when it comes to mowing on the weekends, I mean, like, it's just sort of impossible. I mean, I can't mow every day, which is what it would take. So I thought we'd dispose of a lot of leaves through the city directly, I guess. And I could continue on that thread if you'd like and say what actually happened.
Yeah, please.
So what actually ended up happening was we worked with the lawn service folks, and they ended up mowing with their lawnmower, which is of course a lot bigger than our push lawnmower, and it worked well. It got them down to perhaps reasonably sized pieces, and this are, you know, piled up like feet thick, you know, up to my shins. So that was, I'd say, successful. We still, even after they had to do that a couple times, and then both I and them, they went through and collected leaves as well and raked in the excess areas, because even it was thick enough that even in the places where it was well mulched, it was still very thick. So that had to be removed as well in order for grass to grow, and that's sort of the way it is. I don't have a solution to not having grass grow right now. So we ended up with 2 to 3 rounds of mowing, and then about 17 bags and bins that got taken to the curb. So I'd estimate between 550 and 600 gallons of leaves were picked up through the city service.
Yeah, that is a lot of leaves. So what was your takeaway after, you know, trying this pilot? And
Sure. I think that you know, there were aspects of it that I liked and aspects of it that made it harder on us and more costly on us. The costs were were a little bit more than last year because of the extra mowing. And that's, I attribute that to, you know, I timed how long it took for me to manage putting together, you know, putting a bag in, and it took between 15 to 20 minutes. I mean, it was just extra work for us and also the people we paid to take what wasn't in bulk and put it into small containers. What I liked, but what I liked about it was, you know, it was relatively controllable. It was tidier, much tidier. You know, I liked that we weren't taking as much down, that we were processing more at home. That seems like the right thing to do, the best thing to do, something I would like to do if, you know, if we had fewer leaves, I would choose to do. And so I think my takeaway is that if somehow the city could continue with a hybrid, that would be a really good solution for us. In particular, if the hybrid didn't involve us taking something that was once bulk material and putting it into little tiny things. So,
yeah. So like a larger, what you had to put the excess into was a little small for your yard.
No, the extra time and effort comes from, some of the extra time and effort in my experience came from taking a pile and reducing it into 17 piles.
Yeah.
So if it could have just been one large pile, that would have been easier on our end.
Gotcha. All right. Well, thank you, John, for being willing to participate in the pilot and for being here to share about it tonight. We really appreciate it.
Thank
And
you.
I
It was
know
great to be part of it. Thanks for encouraging everybody to participate in this and getting everybody's getting real input, on the ground input from all the stakeholders. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. And I know you said, depending on the time, you might be available later if there are questions as well. So thank you for that. And so thanks, John. And right now I'll turn it over to Devta to talk about the overall evaluation of the pilot.
Okay, next slide. Great. Hi again. I'm Devta, the Director of Innovation. And one thing that John didn't mention is that he is also right next to a city park. And so a lot of the leaves from those trees also migrated and traveled, as some of the other people were talking about their neighbors' trees, leaves were coming over into their yard as well. So there's lots of literally moving parts to this. We selected the Spicewood and the Park Ridge East neighborhoods because they're so leafy and also because their neighborhood associations are really active. And we knew that they would be good partners for this first effort. So we figured if there was a strategy that could work reasonably in these neighborhoods, that it had a high potential for working in other areas of the city. During the pilot, we used weekly surveys to gauge what kind of leaf management had been done that week. Some of the barriers, some of which you've heard here expressed tonight. If any residents needed additional help, I know that I gave John a second batch of bags to collect some of the mulched leaves and any new insights that came up for them. So there's a couple of insights that came out of those weekly surveys. And one was that managing leaves doesn't happen on an exact timetable. You might plan to work in your yard, but then it rains or something else comes up. And so using the predictable yard waste service to collect the excess leaves became a plus, because you knew that if you didn't get it this weekend, that you had another crack at it or another couple of cracks at it, versus knowing that you have one shot with the vacuum collection truck. We did hear that if yard waste could be picked up weekly instead of bi-weekly during this more leafy season, that would be better. We had all, as an innovation team, thought that you needed a special kind of mower to mulch. Standard mowers, depending on your volume of leaves, can work. A mulching mower works better. But if all you have available to you is a standard mower, then that is a possibility. I mentioned earlier that residents can do what you can do in your yard, but if you have leaves that are blowing from parks or from your neighbors, then you can't really control that, especially if it's windy. And we had a pretty windy year this year. We also heard, to my delight, that the mow, mulching, and composting is a little bit contagious. So people with the pilot signs in their yards found that their neighbors at a social distance, at an appropriate social distance, would come over and ask them about what they were doing, why they had their sign in their yard, what it meant. And so as a result, some of the neighbors who hadn't been part of the pilot, officially part of the pilot, started mulching and composting and using their neighbors' compost bins if they didn't have one established already. And then one other thing is that we had residents who were asking us about, is there somewhere else that we could donate bags of leaves? So for example, is there a farm in the local area that would be interested in picking up bags of leaves? Are there community gardens? Are there churches that would appreciate having extra leaves? So we are actually working in conjunction with some of our IU partners to create a list like that. We weren't able to get that ready in time for the pilot, but that's a resource that we're definitely working on. Next slide, please. We also, at the end of the pilot, surveyed participants to understand how well they were able to complete the challenge, how effective they found the strategy for managing the leaves and keeping them out of the storm drains, and also the level of support for this solution if it were the recommended one. And we had some goals for how we hoped folks would respond. So we had 21 of the 22 participating households who completed the survey, and you can see the results in this chart. The dotted line there shows our goals, and the bars are the actual results. And if the bar is green, then that means we met our goal, and if it's red, that's where we fell short. So those first couple of bars were about how doable the pilot strategy was. Over half, 12 of the 21 households said that they were able to process 100% of the leaves in their yard. So this means that they mulched, composted, and they may have donated leaves to a neighbor or a community garden, but they didn't put any leaves out for the city to collect either through a bag or a bin. And our goal was for half of the households to be able to do this. So the pilot met that goal. The next set of 3 questions were about how effective the pilot strategy was for the yard management goals, for keeping leaves out of the storm drains, and for their schedule. And you can see that we met one of those goals and we came close on the other 2. And then finally, we wanted to gauge the level of support for this option, mulching and composting as much as possible, and then having the city collect the excess bins and bags. Nearly every participating household said that they were somewhat to very supportive of this option. So on a range, there was some degree of support for this option. And we were generous in that goal. We wanted to have just an overwhelming amount of a degree of support. So we're not saying that a majority of the households were strongly supportive. We're saying that there was a range of support for this option. Next slide, please. So a majority of the participants found this strategy to be doable. It was effective in keeping the leaves out of the streets and the sidewalks and the drains, and it aligned with their personal schedules. And there is a degree of support for this as an option. But in talking about meeting our project goals that Kevin was talking about earlier, we wanted to revisit those as well. So the first one is about the financial. You'll remember that Lauren was talking about this project came into being because the 2018 City Council was looking at the budget and said, wow, this is a really, this takes a lot of financial resources for not every resident who's paying into this is reaping the benefit of this, because this service is available to single family households. So it's not being provided to rental properties, and that's a majority of the housing that's available in Bloomington. So we thought that if we could decrease the volume of leaves that were collected by the city around the same amount as the pilot, and shift the resources that we were providing for vacuum pickup to educating and helping households mulch and compost, then we think that the cost to operate the leaf collection by an expanded yard waste crew, so doubling the size of the yard waste crew, could reduce the operating costs from the $709,000 to around $315,000. Remember that the pilot households were able to reduce the volume of the leaves collected by almost 60%. So that's why we were optimistic about these financial goals. Lauren also mentioned the motor vehicle and highway tax that funds the current vacuum collection system. I do want to note that that form of revenue would not be available to us if the service were operated solely out of sanitation, who operates the yard waste crew. But we see this as a positive because that tax is decreasing. And Lauren mentioned that we saw that exacerbated during the pandemic. And those remaining funds could be used for other projects that can serve more residents. Next slide, please. The second evaluation point was the environmental impact. We wanted to reduce the environmental impact, and we assumed that fewer loads would be going to the compost facility. We assume less time per household to collect the leaves. This does assume an increase in the number of yard waste crews with potential increased pickup frequency, and also that, of course, our households are putting out fewer leaves to be collected and that they're processing more. Replacing the 6 active vacuum trucks that are running 8 to 10 hours a day, 5 days a week, with 2 yard waste crews, 8 to 10 hours a day, 5 days a week, would result in a smaller carbon footprint. The biggest assumption is that residents are doing the mulching and composting and processing as much as possible on their yards. And I have seen a number of items floating in the chat about, well, are we just kind of passing that off to the residents? And when you think about, certainly more calculation could go into this. But when you think about these 6 diesel trucks that are idling for most of their time versus people mulching and composting, even if they're using a gas-powered mower, you know, it seems like that we're moving in the right direction from an environmental impact perspective. Next slide. And then finally, when we think about when we issued an initial survey to residents, we heard from them over and over that when we did the initial research, that the pilot gave residents a bit more agency over their leaves. During the pilot, residents could take action as soon as the very first leaf fell. And if they needed leaves collected from their property, they knew the exact day the yard waste service was going to collect them. And they had multiple chances to have their leaves collected, as opposed to the vacuum service, which was coming around to their neighborhoods the one time. Next slide, please. And so the recommendation by this team is to see if what we experienced in Spicewood and Park Ridge holds true for other parts of the city. It was only because of this small pilot of 22 households that we were really able to understand the barriers that you have heard here tonight, and how to begin to accommodate and account for those barriers in our recommendation. So in addition to expanding this pilot strategy to 1,000 volunteer households throughout the city, to make sure that what we saw in this small pilot really holds true, we would also strengthen education for composting and mulching to include and really address Bloomington specific needs. So there are certain things about the tree species that we have in Bloomington that our educational materials didn't address. There are people who have never composted and mulched, and so they need education and support. There are some people who have done it one way, but they want to know more information. So putting resources toward educating and composting and mulching for Bloomington specific needs is something that we would explore as part of the pilot expansion. We also heard from people that, John highlighted this as well, and we heard from some of our senior residents that the process of collection, if they needed leaves taken off of their property, was a bit more work. And so how might we assist those people, especially those who would need physical help, but also those people who need leaves collected from their property and taken off, and it's just a really big job without them having to have the full brunt of that. And then finally, we would use feedback from that 2021 expanded pilot to determine what we would want the city to work with going forward. Next slide, please. So I can feel it in my tongue. It's starting to dry out a little bit. We've done a lot of talking, and we presented how we're currently managing leaves as a city, the improvements that we were able to do this year, some of the problems that we heard from you and our staff about the service, all of the things that we tried, the prototypes and the pilot, and then how it worked out. And now we'd like to hear from you. And a lot of these questions wonderfully are coming up in the chat. And I've been encouraging people to stick around and take these into the small groups that we're getting ready to break into. So in just a moment, Holly is going to automatically send all of us into small groups where you'll have the opportunity to talk about the 3 questions that we've got here. We want to know how you've managed leaves in the past, why you manage them that way so that we understand the motivations. And then if this were the option that we had to work with, meaning mulching and composting most of your leaves, containing the rest for collection, what are the barriers that you would experience, and how might we overcome those barriers or work with those barriers? So you'll stay in your small group for about 30 minutes, and then we'll all come back together and share what we learned. I'm looking at the time, Holly, it's 7:30 right now, and I'd like to give us some time to hear what all of the groups have discussed. So I'm gonna ask that we go into the small groups for more like 20 minutes. And we may not even need that much, but I think 20 minutes would be a good amount of time. Each small group is gonna have a facilitator and a recorder. So you're gonna have somebody who's documenting what your small group is talking about. And then when we come back as a large group, each of those recorders, documenters will report out on what the small groups discussed, and then we will we'll close out the meeting after that. Are there any questions before we go into the smaller groups? Okay, we've got, great, okay. So Holly, if you'd like to send us into the smaller groups, we'll be in there for about 20 minutes, and there'll be a timer, and we'll come back into the large group.